So let's continue. This is going to be like let's talk about these traditional foods and patterns here. We didn't even get into tea, the rituals, like matcha tea rituals in Japan, or the afternoon tea that the British tea rooms always had, your tea and scones or your lady fingers in the afternoon. And the tradition which this part I didn't always get, men had it with dairy, with milk, right? And women were supposed to have it with only lemon on a lot of teas, like some of the traditional ways or whatever. But between that and other traditional foods, how isn't science just absolutely proving that what you said earlier about there was a grandma's advice bit that was better for us, that was right, that, there's traditional medicine, there's traditional techniques. You look at the Ayurvedic yogis and Ayurvedic cooking, Indian food with all the spices put together a certain way. Somehow, and Mediterranean foods, unique foods that have been selected over the ages since Roman times and before, and they're considered some of the healthiest items. And you look at the Hadza studies and the Hadza people that Stanford has been following. There's,
The-
yeah, amazing, amazing. So let's look at traditional foods and drinks. Aren't these being proven out to be what we should have been doing all along instead of just mass production? How we need to be preparing things fresh.
Yeah, you have all the studies on the Mediterranean diet, and obviously, vegetarian, and then but here in America, a lot of us think that our food traditions are old, but hamburgers and hot dogs are just from the last century. So like, we've abandoned whatever the Native American foodways are for for this new thing, and so yeah, you say, well, these hamburger rolls and hamburgers, well, low in fiber and low in polyphenols and things like that. Well, yeah. So it's almost like, well, we shouldn't be surprised when science corroborates some of our traditional knowledge in favor of
Paul,
whatever we invented over the past century.
Dave, your thoughts on that? Because I
Yeah,
know
I think we need
Horton's up
to,
there.
just I think what we need to do is look at the living situation that gave rise to traditional foods. This is very interesting because they didn't have refrigeration and they weren't able to save food. It didn't matter actually where you lived in the world. There's some variance there, but it didn't matter where you lived in the world. You weren't able to effectively save food in a lot of ways, right? So the preservation part. So you had to have great timing. You had to predict the weather. You had to follow the herds. You had to take a lot of time to effing figure it out, if you don't mind me saying. And that was hundreds and thousands of years. So when we're talking about traditional foods, we're talking about the survival mechanisms that led us to how we got to be this type of human flourishing social collaborative that we live in today. So how did we do that? We took foods, we figured out if we put them with certain things, with water, and we left it out to the invisible creatures in the air and the soil, it would ferment. It would change it, but it would make it healthier. It would preserve it. It would do different things. So that's one thing. Fermentable foods. We ate things in season. So if it was ripe, we had no way to save it. So we had to either process it in some minimal way or we had to eat it right then and there and figure out what would happen after. We had to process meat. We had to use everything that was on the animal if we were doing that. You had to learn how to fish. You had to figure out where the fish were. You had to eat some of the vegetables that were in the sea. So what were you really doing? You were consuming the ecosystem around you. It was not artificial because you were part of it. So in traditional food systems, you are eating the things that are part of the ecosystem that are already keeping you alive, right? The caribou eat the grass down, does the carbon thing, it does the thing, the grass grows, the microbiome's doing this, the insects are in the flowers. It's all the things that are together, and we participate in eating each other. Everybody does this in nature. We all eat each other. But we decided that we were going to do something different around 10,000 years ago. So, the dawn of the agricultural revolution, we decided to be a little less nomadic, a little bit more stationary, blah, blah, blah. So we tried to control the environment around us, fast forward 10,000 years. And now we think that using things like polysorbate 80 and mono and diglycerides and all of these crazy emulsifiers and all this fractionated proteins and this and that flavor enhancers, blah, 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 blah. And we're so disconnected from that original ecosystem that that's not a traditional food. It's a synthetic manufactured attempt to duplicate the complexities of the ecosystems that we come from, and it's not working.
Well, and you make an excellent point there, and the example it brings to mind is yogurt. It's like, well, any of us could put a bowl of milk on our counter, and the wild yeast and everything create the yogurt. Whereas you could also go buy a Chobani and know that that's pasteurized, and then they dope it with one strain of a certain probiotic. Well, which one is more rich and diverse in microorganisms,
There's no question.
Chobani or what you grow yourself?
Yeah, you just take kefir, for example, 26 to 100 different types of bacteria and yeast. Wobi is something we use in our industry, that's to describe how we grow ferments. Specifically kombucha, it's usually described for that. Well, what it means is specific colonies of bacteria and yeast. And you use that little disc and you throw it in and you start to make things. So though they're already there. And if you understand fermentation culture, we have a fair number of people here who originally come from India. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is they make their own yogurt every day. Every day. Every single day they make their own yogurt. On the stove, they have the thing, blah, blah, blah. That's their ferment.
Well, in Pennsylvania, farmer's cheese was done the same way. The Amish farmer's cheese and fresh cheeses, they just left the milk out. Whoever didn't finish the milk, okay, we put this in this either jar or stone pot. Here, we set it over here under the tree or over in the sun for the different flavors.
Well, it's almost magic too, because it acts by lowering the pH of the food to kill off any bad microorganisms as a food preservation. Everything. It's like if you could invent a microorganism that stabilizes food like cheese or whatever, then it's like magic. But no, that's nature, and that's how it's been done for that millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, and I also look at it though, with what the Ketchwood told me, how even those things, because they're big on making certain community drinks. Anyway, all of these things though, they said, even the invisible creatures evolve. And today we are using pre-identified strains ever since Louis Pasteur and his pals started identifying strains. Heineken has a big locked vault of the original strain that they tap into that nobody else can get into. But, in the philosophy of some of these cultures, those things evolve constantly. We know this.
Well, actually, I think, Judy, the research actually supports what you're saying, because that study came out last year and this year where they looked at ancient microbiome versus a microbiome that was current, and they have different adaptabilities to the environment and to the food that you give them and to the humans. So we may not actually be doing ourselves a favor by saving a microbe that actually was performing in a guild in the past.
Exactly. There are now, but we have to acknowledge the fact that there are archaic species and strains that survive continuously, and somehow, these archaic species help develop all life because they exist in almost everything living in some way or form, and it's almost
there are very few germ-free places.
But as a food safety person, it frightens me when I think, hey, how do we prevent listeria from getting into our facility, and how do we make food cheaply and inexpensively enough so that people can afford it too? And so we're going to have large processing facilities at the same time as but you say, hey, wild yeast and everything in the air, it's like this is how it's always been done. That also, while a part of me thinks this is great, also a part of me is scared, right?
Yeah, right. Of course. And rightly so, I think, because
it's going to change what you add at the same time to these microbes, or what location it's in. Even by latitude alone, even if everything else remains the same, by latitude alone, they may behave differently. So you don't know whether it's going to be a positive or a negative by changing situations. So yes, we do need control. And Dave, you mentioned emulsifier. It's like we can't blanket. This is going back to including all options, right? We can't blanket even emulsifiers, because we know that certain process emulsifiers are very targeted prebiotics, and they're going to be applied at some point. And so the question there now is there a way to marry all this together and make a
Yeah,
better?
I think, Judy, that's the whole point of the conversation. It's a way to marry it together. I think that the blanket statement is we can do better, and I think everybody knows it. We can do better. What the specifics are, sure, I don't know that. You don't know that. We're going to figure that out as we move forward in time. We're going to realize that there are some things we've been doing that absolutely are not high quality solutions for the long term, but we also have the ability to pivot, and we're going to start doing some of those things.
We have the
Um,
science now to look at it logically, as long as we stay open-minded to everything instead of just blanket exclusions like some topics are approaching these days.
I think
Well, and
regenerative agriculture needs to, continue to maintain its forward march into
Yeah,
what we're doing. I
that's
think
the
that's very
key to
important. There's going to be
sustainable
varying levels of
life.
that, but it's going to be important
you
because
know,
that talks about the ecosystems that things are in.
that's right. Well, and the fear of food ingredients, based on its function, like I think, we have to be careful whenever we're saying that all emulsifiers are one thing or another, because Judy is right. Some of them could be fiber sources, and it could be natural and sustainable, and it helps the user not stick their nose up when it separates out in the bottle, and so you say, well. We do have to marry all these things and also understand, what is the real world impact of everything, the things that we talk about, what is the practical impact? But yeah, opportunity cost, if we're focused on certain things and we can't focus on maybe things that are more important. And so how do we begin to prioritize,
Well, I
when
think
we,
priority, has to be based on a number of different things, to be honest with you, Blake, because you have varying people of varying incomes and skill levels that have the ability to understand and prepare food or even acquire the food in the first place. So the principles are ones that I think that we need to propagate forward, like fermentation and fermented products are important, but not really be careful about our prescriptions based on the cost of acquisition. Some people just can't afford it, unfortunately. So if we can incentivize people to make their own and go back to like shredding some cabbage and carrots and then making some sauerkraut or whatever, I think that that's important. But I think the underlying first principle when we're talking about, what's this thing with traditional foods is we have to understand, yes, there are elements of processing that are important to feed a global population. Really hard to escape that fact because not everyone can effectively grow their own food. That is a pipe dream right now. Maybe, maybe it comes back, right? Not everyone can make their own food. There's these things. So we have to have a variance of options and not be judgmental
Right.
about how people are able to be well, but we need to do better.